Hey there, it's me again out here in the absolutely beautiful, stunning Sedona in Arizona, where I am out having a lovely 3-4 hour hike, and I just thought I'd stop and answer a couple of the tribe's questions. Always good questions that come up in the tribe, so I always really enjoy just taking the time out wherever I am in the world to just kind of answer those questions. So today's one is from Chris Tuck, and I've posted the question in this thread, but ultimately it comes down to this. The core essence of the question is, why do we self-sabotage, and what can we do about it? Okay, so here's a really interesting thing, or it's interesting to me, and certainly from a literal perspective and from a neuroscience perspective, it's really important, I think, for all coaches to understand that self-sabotage really doesn't exist apart from in people with some kind of mental health issues. Okay, so you know, those people that clearly self-harm and take pills and cut their wrists and all that kind of stuff, then there's clearly something there's a mental health issue behind it. But in the mainstream population, if you will, self-sabotage doesn't exist. Eating Haagen-Dazs even though you're on a diet isn't self-sabotage. Not going to the gym even though you said you desperately want to make this the year that you're going to get into the best shape of your life isn't self-sabotage. As a former soldier, I could tell you that the definition of sabotage is the willful and deliberate destruction of opportunity and strategic targets. Okay, the willful and deliberate destruction of strategic and opportunity targets. Now think about that in, you know, from a very literal perspective. When you find yourself kind of head down in a tub of Haagen-Dazs, even though your biggest dream is to get into the best physical shape of your life, was there deliberate and willful attempts to throw yourself off of your game plan? Did you say, screw it, I'm going to eat this so that I can deliberately and willfully screw up all of my chances of getting into the best shape of my life? And I'm going to say that for 99.99999% of the population, that's simply not going to be true. There's going to be people that just find themselves eating reactively. It wasn't a cognitive process, or if, you know, it was a kind of a reactionary thing, and it was they were really deep in stress, or they were deeply upset or emotional, and they just found themselves doing something that doesn't necessarily serve them in terms of their bigger goal, but it does indeed serve them in terms of eliciting some kind of short-term comfort or short-term alleviation of stress, right? So let's have a look at kind of why we can't hold our longer-term goals, our longer-term visions, our longer-term dreams for ourselves in mind when we're in deep in stress, or to use the language of mind map, when we're in threat. Okay, so quite simply, the only places in your brain that you could really call human is the prefrontal cortex, right up here behind the forehead, right? And the prefrontal cortex it's essentially, the right prefrontal cortex is all about future-based things, right? It's all about creativity. It holds an idea in mind, and it says, if I do these things, what will happen? If I carry on with this diet for the next 3 months, where do I imagine myself getting to? And then the left prefrontal cortex is like the logic center, and it says, okay, so what are the things that I need to do in order to make what my right prefrontal cortex has said possible happen, right? So when you're in threat, one of the interesting and kind of somewhat upsetting parts, you know, in terms of it kind of throws us off our game plan, is that when you're in threat, you get pulled out of your prefrontal cortex, so all your creativity, all your future-based thinking, and all the logic that make that possible disappears, and you get pulled back into your more, if you will, your more animalistic brain centers, and those have very, very different concerns. Okay, very different concerns. So your mammalian centers are very much about connection, they're very much about hierarchy, they're very much about being respected or connected or cared for or accepted, and then you've got your reptilian brain centers, which are just about basic physiology, right? So, not just, I mean, really important, but I think you get the drift. When you're operating from an animal brain, you are not behaving like a human. When you're behaving a human, you are forward thinking, you're creative, you're holding the big dream in mind, and you are logically paying attention to the actions that you're taking and kind of measuring them against what is likely if you continue taking them. That is just human brain stuff. When you become threatened, when you move into an emotional center, you are being pulled out of all of that human processing and instead becoming animalistic. So what do we do about that? How can we get ourselves out of that kind of catch-22 loop? Well, one of the things that I teach in Mind Map is this process of what we call safe havening, staying left of bang, and creating threat recipes. That is, becoming more aware to when threat is building up, so that you can, in the parlance that I use, get out of the room with a gunman. So you don't stay there and try and soldier on through and say, well, I should be able to get through this, I can tough it out. Instead, what you say is, okay, I can feel some threat building up, because it rarely, you know, other than stepping out in front of a car or being jumped in an alley or something like that, threat very rarely comes upon us instantaneously. It's usually the case of we feel something off, we start to build up into that threat. As the threat builds up, we start to feed the fire, so to speak, right? And we become even more threatened, and then we end up our day pissed off and upset and moody, right? So of course we then behave in accordance with those emotions that we're feeling. So what do? We learn to identify all the component parts that go in to creating threat in the first place. Threat can't happen. Threat isn't, for 99.9% of the experiences we have, threat isn't just pure cause, it's more like effect. We actually have to feed the fire to fully get into threat. So that's my invitation to you and with your clients. You know, don't ask yourself or your client to do human brain work when you're in an animal brain situation. Your first priority, and that's why Mind Map is built around the threat concept, is not to look at goals and look at dreams and look at desires and all of that kind of stuff. It's to get you safe, because once you're safe, the dreams, the goals, the logic, the creativity, all that awesome human brain stuff will come back online as a matter of course. You won't have to force it. Hope that's been useful. Speak to you again very, very soon. Take care.